Okay, let's dive in. We received an inquiry from a listener that is, well, it's just fantastically specific.
It really is. It's a very modern question aimed at some very ancient material.
Exactly. You came to us asking for something like the neuroscientific basis, the actual repeatable mechanism for generating profound internal pleasure.
And not just any pleasure. Bliss.
Yeah.
Generated simply from, sustained attention on your own breathing.
It's an audacious question. And we had to say up front, our sources predate brain science by, what, a couple of millennia?
Just a bit, yeah. We're diving deep into the earliest discourses. The Nikayas, the Suttas, they don't talk about dopamine or serotonin, of course.
Of course.
But what they do offer is this incredibly detailed, high-resolution map of consciousness, an internal map.
I've always seen these texts less as historical documents and more like an engineering manual for the mind.
That's a great way to put it.
It lays out a precise, repeatable technology for achieving these states of rapture and bliss that are completely independent of anything happening outside of you. So that's our deep dive today. We're going to trace the flow. How does simple, sustained attention on the breath lead to these incredible states? And then, and this is really the critical part, why is achieving this supreme internal pleasure only the halfway point?
Exactly. Why isn't it the final destination? We're going to look at the textual mechanics of this internal reward system. Why does withdrawing from the senses suddenly unlock this powerful, self-sustaining fountain of happiness?
It really frames the whole spiritual path as the ultimate form of self-engineering, doesn't it?
It does.
You're radically re-architecting your internal reward system. You're deciding consciously that the external world, the messy, unreliable, perishable world, is just not required for profound contentment.
You're finding a more reliable source.
A much more reliable source. So let's begin that journey. Let's start exactly where the texts tell the practitioner to begin, by laying the foundation, by establishing sustained attention.
The foundational instruction, and you see this across so many of these early texts, is just astonishingly practical. It's very focused on environmental control.
Right. It completely rejects the idea of, trying to meditate in the middle of a noisy, distracting life.
It's not about that at all.
It starts with a physical mandate. The location is absolutely critical, isn't it?
It is. The instruction is specific. Go to a wilderness, the root of a tree, or an empty hut.
An empty hut. I mean, that immediately tells you everything. This requires a deep, uninterrupted withdrawal from the normal flow of sensory life.
It sets the stage for seclusion. That's the first prerequisite. Then, after the location, comes the posture.
Sit cross-legged, set the body straight, and establish mindfulness in the present.
And notice that sequence. You have the physical stability, the seclusion. Then you have the ethical intention to be present here and now. And the straight spine is often seen as a symbol for mental uprightness.
So you set the stage physically, then you get to the core practice itself, mindfulness of breathing, it's deceptively simple on the surface.
Deceptively. The instruction is mindful they breathe in, mindful they breathe out.
And that's it. That's the engine. You are focusing the raw power of your attention onto the most immediate, automatic physical process you have.
But simple doesn't mean shallow. The texts are very clear that this attention has to be applied with precision. It's not just a blank stare.
What do they mean by precision?
Well, the meditator is instructed to observe the breath being heavy or light. Sometimes it's described as long or short.
Ah, so it's a fine-grained observation.
It's a continuous moment-to-moment tracking. And the reason for that is to prevent the mind from drifting, to stop it from getting lost in stories, memories, or planning for the future.
The breath becomes the anchor.
It becomes the anchor to the present moment. It's a tangible, physical reality that is always changing right here, right now.
So let's talk about the broader framework here, because this isn't just about, deep breathing exercises. This is the establishment of Satipatthana mindfulness. And it's a very targeted psychological operation.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
This is the training ground for awareness. The texts specify that a meditator observes an aspect of the body. In this case, the breath or feelings, the mind, or principles.
And there are conditions on how you observe, right?
Yes. The observation has to be done while being keen, aware, and mindful. And the ultimate purpose, which is absolutely crucial to understand, is to be rid of covetousness and displeasure for the world.
So this deep dive, it doesn't even start with pleasure. It starts with the kind of psychological purification.
Exactly.
This intense focus on the breath is designed to interrupt the mind's default setting,
Which is,
chasing what it wants, covetousness, and pushing away what it doesn't want, displeasure.
right, you're starving those two impulses of their fuel, which is your attention. Without that foundation of, let's call it ethical control and psychological purity, any deep concentration you achieve would it would be unstable.
Or you might use it for unskillful ends.
Or that, yes. The internal pleasure we're about to get into is completely predicated on this initial act of letting go of your normal desires and aversions.
So if the goal is this kind of self-engineering, we need to really detail the mechanics. How does attention progress from just watching the breath to creating this profound mental stability? How does the body itself, through the breath, become the tool for stabilizing the whole mind?
Well, the breath is the perfect bridge. The texts explicitly call it an aspect of the body. It's physical, obviously, but it's also completely tied to your mental state.
Sure, everyone knows that. Think about how you breathe when you're stressed versus when you're relaxed.
It's a direct link. The mind and breath are intrinsically connected, so the initial practice is observation, but then the instructions move beyond that. It's not just passive watching.
They become instructions for refinement and control. The advanced breath instructions are fascinating here.
They really are. They detail a clear movement from a gross sensation to a much more subtle form of control. The practitioner progresses to training themselves, thinking, I'll breathe in, experiencing the whole body.
And I'll breathe out, experiencing the whole body.
Exactly. This isn't just focusing on the tip of the nose or the rise and fall of the chest anymore. It's an attempt to unify your entire somatic awareness.
That sounds like a kind of cognitive restructuring. You're breaking down the mental fragmentation of the body and unifying attention. Why the whole body? What's the point of that?
Because fragmentation prevents deep immersion. Normally, the mind just flits from one sensation to another, an itch here, a sound there, a stray thought.
The monkey mind.
The monkey mind, exactly. So by dedicating your attention to the entire body as a single continuous system that's linked to the breath, you begin to achieve unification.
And that unification is the prerequisite for the final stage of this breath control.
Which is stilling physical processes.
Stilling physical process, that implies a level of focus that's profound. A state where the gross movements of the body, maybe even the breath itself, become extremely subtle, almost imperceptible.
And this sustained, refined attention is what leads to samadhi.
Right. Samadhi, let's define that.
It's often translated as concentration or immersion or unification of mind. The texts are clear. This whole practice, when it's developed and cultivated, is described as very fruitful and beneficial.
And the direct psychological result of all this systematic calming and unifying is samadhi. The heart or the mind it settles down, it unifies, it becomes completely absorbed in the object of attention.
The attention has transitioned into a kind of power. It becomes unshakable.
And we've hit a really critical point here in the architecture of this whole training path, this depth of immersion, this samadhi. It's not a standalone achievement. It's not just about feeling calm.
No, it's a necessary faculty for liberation. It fulfills one of the 5 spiritual faculties, which are listed as faith, energy, mindfulness, immersion, and wisdom.
So mindfulness is the fuel.
Mindfulness is the fuel that stabilizes the mind. That stability then allows for the full development of the faculty of immersion. In this system, concentration is not optional. It is the absolute prerequisite for insight.
Why? Why is it so essential?
Because the texts say that immersion, when it's fully developed, leads directly to true, penetrating understanding of reality. Without the mind being unified and still, all your attempts at wisdom are just intellectual chatter.
Just concepts.
Just concepts. The stillness has to come first.
Okay, so the foundation is set. You have ethical conduct, physical seclusion, sustained and refined attention on the breath. And all of this leads to the unification and stillness of the mind, samadhi.
That's the platform.
Now we can finally answer the listener's question. What happens when all that mental energy, which is no longer being spent on external desires or internal chatter, what happens when it's finally gathered and focused?
It transforms. It transforms into pleasure.
And that brings us to the yanas. This is where we map the internal pleasure states.
We are now moving squarely into the territory of the jhanas, or the absorptions. And this really is the ancient psychology's map of internal, non-sensual pleasure.
And it's predictable.
It's presented as a predictable and, in a subjective sense, measurable sequence of states. But, and this is key, they only arise when immersion, samadhi, is sufficiently deep.
So you can't just wish your way into them.
No, they're a direct result of the sustained attention on the breath that we just spent all that time discussing.
This is where we directly address your query about internal pleasure. These are the states that demonstrate unequivocally that the mind can self-generate profound reward and satisfaction. Let's start with the first breakthrough, the first absorption.
The first absorption, or jhana one, is the moment the internal reward system truly switches on. The mind has finally achieved, as the texts say, seclusion from sensual pleasures and unskillful qualities.
So, because the external world is shut off?
The system generates its own superior reward.
And what defines this state? What does it feel like according to the sources?
It's characterized by two key factors: piti, which is often translated as rapture, and sukha, which is bliss or happiness.
Rapture and bliss.
Yes. But crucially, it still requires two active mental factors to maintain it: vitaka, which is placing the mind on the object, and vikara, which is keeping it connected to the object.
Okay, so the mind is fully engaged, but it's focused purely internally. It's still working.
It's still working. Let's unpack placing and connecting, because those can sound a bit abstract. For you, thinking in terms of modern cognition, this is sustained, focused effort.
Right.
Think of vitaka, or placing, as the initial mental strike. It's like hitting a bell. It's the application of thought to the object, which at this point might be a mental image of the breath.
And vikar.
Vikara, keeping it connected, is the sustained resonance of that bell. It's the continuous dwelling upon and examining of the object. So in the first jhana, the mind is filled with this incredible bliss, but it's still actively working to maintain that focus against any subtle resistance.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting for anyone trying to understand this process. This internally generated bliss is so powerful, so radical compared to anything from the outside world, that the texts say it often trips practitioners up.
Absolutely. The sources note that this bliss is so profound, some individuals mistakenly assert that this state is the final goal, that this is how the self attains ultimate extinguishment in this life.
They mistake the bliss for liberation itself. Why?
Well, they rationalize it. They think, I have successfully transcended all those coarse sensual pleasures. I now see them as suffering and perishable. So this new, stable, internal bliss, this must be the final destination.
They mistake the means for the end.
They mistake the vehicle for the destination, and that just underscores the sheer potency of this first jhana. If it can be mistaken for total liberation, the internal pleasure must be immense.
But the map of consciousness doesn't stop there. It continues, refining the experience even further into the second absorption.
The second absorption, or jhana 2, is defined by a cessation, a dropping away of that mental effort we just talked about.
So the work stops.
The active work stops. As the placing, the vitaka, and the connecting, the vikara of the mind are stilled, the second absorption arises naturally. The mind becomes even more unified, even more serene, because the effort that was required to maintain that first state just vanishes.
So the second jhana is considered superior because it requires less mental energy to sustain.
Exactly. It's more efficient, more refined.
And what are its characteristics? How is it defined?
It's still defined by rapture and bliss, piti and sukha, but they are now born of immersion, not of seclusion. This is a key distinction.
What's the difference?
The first state's pleasure arises from having withdrawn from the senses. The second state's pleasure arises from the sheer quality of the concentration itself. It's self-sustaining, it's characterized by internal clarity, and the mind being absolutely at one unified, without that mental turbulence of placing and connecting.
This is where the self-generated pleasure becomes fully autonomous and stable.
That's right. It's like a flywheel that's now spinning under its own momentum.
This really sounds like a complete override of our normal biological pleasure systems, something generated purely by a focused cognitive operation. And the textual imagery they use to describe it is incredibly visceral. It almost directly addresses that idea of a neuroscientific basis.
The analogy they use is of internal hydraulic pressure. It's very powerful. Imagine a deep, spring-fed pool where the water doesn't come from any external stream. It just wells up from within, from the bottom, completely saturating the entire container.
Okay.
The meditator in this state drenches, steeps, fills, and spreads their body with rapture and bliss born of immersion. And then it adds, there's no part of the body that's not spread with rapture and bliss born of immersion.
Total saturation. The body is literally perceived as being flooded with a self-generated reward. It's a full-body sensory experience of joy. For you, the listener who asked about internal pleasure, this passage is the definitive ancient answer.
It is. Sustained attention can create a state where your entire physical being feels like it's vibrating with joy and contentment.
It demonstrates that the mind, when it's fully concentrated, can be its own supplier of pleasure, and a pleasure that far exceeds the unstable, limited pleasures you get from the external senses.
The internal clarity and unity are so profound that the external world just, it fades away entirely.
But even here, in this incredible state, the texts immediately introduce a warning.
Always.
They acknowledge that while this pleasure is profoundly superior, much finer than the first absorption, the Buddha is quoted as saying, there is an even finer pleasure beyond it. The system is always designed for continuous refinement.
That's the key structural element of the entire path. Everything that is conditioned is impermanent. That includes even the highest spiritual rapture. And this insight is what leads us to the quieting of the sheer energy of rapture itself as we move into the third absorption.
Hold on. Before we move on, let's really nail down the difference between rapture and bliss in this context. Piti and sukha. If the second jhana is defined by both, what is the P that has to be dropped to get to the third?
That's a great question. PD, or rapture, is often translated as joy or even exhilarating excitement. It has a strong energetic component. It's the rush, the effervescence. It's the physical rising and spreading that we just described with the water analogy.
So it's an active, energetic joy.
Very much so. Sukha, on the other hand, the bliss is deeper, it's more stable, it's a profound contentment, a sense of well-being and satisfaction.
Okay, so in the third absorption, the practitioner sees that energetic rush, the peti, as a disturbance.
Exactly. Even though it's a spiritual joy, it's seen as too gross, too close to excitement or agitation. So they intentionally let the rapture fade away, keeping only the core bliss, the sukha.
That is a radical act of subtraction.
It is. The meditator becomes purely mindful and aware. And the texts say they are personally experiencing the bliss while remaining perfectly equanimous. They've purified the state further by moving past the intense, sometimes overwhelming energy of rapture.
The pleasure is now stable, quiet, profound. It's been stripped of all its effervescence.
This must be an incredible moment in one's psychological training. You are consciously letting go of something supremely enjoyable, that spiritual rush, in order to achieve something calmer and more enduring.
Yes, it proves that you're not attached to the high. You're committed to stability. And this leads, logically, to the fourth absorption, where the final emotional duality is resolved.
The fourth absorption is defined by giving up pleasure and pain entirely. The mind enters a state that is without any feeling pleasant or painful.
It's beyond both.
It's beyond both. The mind exists solely with pure equanimity and mindfulness, and this is where you see the phrase stilling the physical processes come to its full fruition.
This is the pinnacle of serenity achieved through concentration. The mind is so focused and so still that even that subtle, beautiful remnant of bliss, sukha, is also transcended.
The texts describe the stilled state beautifully. They say the heart is open and unenveloped, and that this leads to a mind that is full of radiance.
What's left at that point? If rapture is gone and bliss is gone and even physical processes are stilled, what is the experience?
It is a state of profound, unshakable equilibrium and clarity. The radiance comes from the complete absence of obstruction, doubt, or any mental fluctuation. It's pure, stable, objectless awareness.
So it's not happiness in the way we experienced it in the first or second jhana.
No. It's psychological perfection in the sense of stability and complete freedom from reactivity.
So the journey is it's incredible. It starts with simple attention, it creates overwhelming euphoria, it refines that into quiet contentment, and then it ultimately transcends all feeling into pure equanimity and stillness. This is a comprehensive, step-by-step technological path to engineer internal states. But now we arrive at the central, counterintuitive insight of this entire system. We have spent all this time describing this successful generation of supreme internal bliss. So why? Why must the practitioner immediately turn around and treat that very blissful state as just another impermanent, transient thing? Why let go of ultimate happiness?
This is the difference between a high-level psychological technology and a genuine philosophy of liberation. To understand why, we have to look at how the texts make these crucial distinctions between different kinds of happiness. They categorize experiences based on their source and their stability.
Okay, let's start with the baseline we all know, the pleasure of the flesh.
Right. This is the pleasure and happiness that arises from the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. Sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches. Anything that is, as the texts say, likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing.
The default human operating system.
Pretty much. And the texts define this as inherently dangerous and fragile because it requires external objects. And external objects are constantly changing and perishable. So clinging to them is just a recipe for predictable suffering.
Okay, that makes sense. Then we have the rapture not of the flesh, the spiritual pleasure we just detailed in the Hanas. This is obviously superior because it's self-generated.
It is. It's the proof of concept that internal reward is possible. But even this profound internal rapture is only considered spiritual or non-sensual happiness. It's still a conditioned phenomenon. It arose because of certain causes and conditions.
Which means it will cease when those conditions change.
Precisely. And this is why the system posits an even higher state, the highest rapture.
Now, what defines the highest rapture? Is that the fourth jhana we just discussed?
No. This is the most subtle and important point. This highest form of satisfaction is not a feeling at all. It's a cognitive achievement.
Or realization?
It's a realization. It arises when a person, who is now liberated, reviews their own mind and sees it, with certainty, as being free from greed, hate, and delusion. The satisfaction isn't the experience of bliss. It's the profound intellectual realization that you are finally free from the fundamental drivers of all your suffering.
So the greatest pleasure is the wisdom itself, the knowledge that you're free.
Exactly. And this entire discussion pivots on the mechanism of feeling, which in these texts is called Vedana.
You mentioned that Vedana is central to suffering. What exactly do the texts mean by it? Is it just emotion?
It's more fundamental than that. Vedana is simply defined as what is felt. It's the raw quality of any experience. Pleasant, painful, or neutral. It's the immediate feedback from your senses and your mind before you've even layered a story on top of it.
So it's a necessary component of consciousness.
Yes, but the system is crystal clear on this point. All feelings, all Vedana are impermanent, they are a form of suffering because they are unstable and they are perishable.
And that includes the sublime bliss of the third jhana. It arose from concentration, and therefore, it must eventually cease or change.
That is the pivotal insight. The moment the meditator takes that pleasant feeling, whether it's a beautiful sight or the internal rapture of the third jhana, and tries to hold it,
Tries to make it permanent.
they engage the mechanism of suffering. Grasping at pleasant feelings or having an aversion to unpleasant ones leads directly to the underlying latent tendencies of greed and repulsion.
Let's focus intensely on that mechanism of craving and clinging. This seems to be the difference between simply feeling pleasure and relishing it. If I feel the bliss of the second jhana, that's just a conditioned event. But if I cling to it, that's where the problem begins.
We have to be absolutely clear here. The feeling itself is neutral in terms of causing future suffering. It is the cognitive operation on the feeling that creates the problem. And the texts call this operation relishing.
Relishing. How exactly do they define that?
The process is laid out with meticulous detail. If a person approves, welcomes, and keeps clinging to likable, desirable senses, and this includes internal mental states like the shanas, this gives rise to relishing.
So it's the mental appetite. It's the affirmation of the experience saying, this is good, I want more of this is mine.
That's a perfect summary of it. And what happens when relishing arises?
This is the core of it, right?
This is the core. The texts state it unequivocally. Relishing is defined as the origin of suffering. Suffering doesn't come from the pleasant feeling itself. It comes from the desire for that feeling to continue, which is what relishing is.
So this is the essential paradox.
Yeah.
The path provides a method to self-generate an internal pleasure so powerful that it makes all external sensual pleasure seem gross and dull.
Yes.
But once that spiritual pleasure is achieved, the practitioner has to turn around, recognize its inherent impermanence, and consciously choose not to relish it.
It becomes the ultimate training tool. It is far, far easier to let go of your craving for sensual things when you have access to a much better internal source. But then you have to use that superior internal source as a test subject.
Can I observe this powerful, beautiful state of bliss without clinging to it?
Right, because if you cling to the internal bliss, you've simply swapped an external addiction for a much more subtle internal psychological addiction.
And you're still not free.
You are still not free. So when relishing ceases, when you successfully stop clinging to even these beautiful internal feeling suffering ceases, the mind is then said to be well freed.
This requires a level of observational skill that is just. It's difficult to fathom. to be drenched in bliss and simply watch it as a neutral, passing phenomenon.
It requires the deep, sustained insight that can only be cultivated within the stillness of the jhanas. The tranquility generated by sustained attention on the breath isn't just for relaxation, it's the stable platform from which you can observe the rise and fall of even the most subtle internal feeling without reacting with approval or aversion.
You become the observer of the entire mechanism of feeling and clinging rather than a participant in it.
That's the shift.
This moves our conversation from pleasure generation to genuine, unshakable freedom. The internal bliss is merely the proof that the external world can be dismissed. The real work is learning to dismiss the self-generated world, too.
Exactly. Which is why we have to broaden the discussion now from the single thread of feeling, of Vedana, to the whole structure of identity that this path seeks to dismantle. The ultimate goal is transcending identification with what are called the 5 grasping aggregates.
And these aggregates, they're the building blocks of what we mistake for a permanent self, correct?
That's right. Form, which is the body. Feeling, which we've just discussed. Perception, or labeling of things. Choices, or volitional formations. And consciousness itself.
The texts define this entire bundle, this whole package of what we think of as me, as suffering.
That is the core realization. Because these 5 aggregates are continuously rising, changing, and ceasing, clinging to them as a stable self guarantees dissatisfaction and pain. They are unstable, therefore they are suffering. The whole practice works by creating the stillness necessary to see this reality clearly, shattering the illusion of permanence.
And this ties back directly to that cognitive shift you mentioned earlier, disillusionment, or nirvana.
Yes. And we should be clear, nirvana is not a passive or gloomy state. It's not depression. It is a powerful, active process of seeing things as they truly are.
Which means seeing them as impermanent and ultimately unsatisfactory if you cling to them.
Right. And this penetrating insight automatically triggers a fading away of desire, which inexorably leads to freedom. It's a causal mechanism, not just a change in mood.
So how does the sustained attention practice, the jhanas, specifically facilitate this disillusionment?
The practitioner, having achieved the stable clarity of the jhanas, is in the perfect position to observe the impermanence of all things, including the blissful jhana states themselves. They rise, they persist for a while, and they cease.
They become a laboratory for observing impermanence.
The ultimate laboratory. The practice involves truly seeing that all the aggregates, your body, your feelings, your thoughts, even your consciousness, are impermanent, are suffering, and are perishable.
And this direct seeing then feeds that central axiom of liberation. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. That shift in perception must be truly revolutionary. It must dissolve the very grounds for anxiety.
It is the eradication of attachment, and attachment is the root of all anxiety and fear. When you realize that your entire assumed identity is just an unstable process, an illusion of permanence, then the mental energy you were spending defending that illusion is freed.
There's nothing left to defend.
Nothing left to defend, and nothing to fear losing. And this cognitive shift is the ultimate fruit of the Noble Eightfold Path. The path starts with right view, and it culminates in right immersion, which is what we achieve through sustained attention on breathing.
And the development of that right immersion leads directly to a reliance on seclusion, fading away, and cessation. The texts say this entire process, it ripens as letting go.
It does. And the internal bliss of the jhanas acts as a crucial catalyst in this ripening process.
How so? Why is it a catalyst? How does it speed up the process of letting go?
Because the spiritual pleasure is so pure and satisfying, it makes the act of letting go of external attachments almost automatic. If your mind has been saturated by self-generated bliss, the allure of a new car or fancy meal it pales in comparison.
The gravitational pull of the world weakens dramatically.
It really does. That makes perfect psychological sense. You need a replacement for the perceived reward of the world before you can ask someone to let go of everything. The jhana bliss is that radical replacement. It's strong enough to motivate the final transcendence.
So for the practitioner who is clearly seen with right wisdom all conditions as truly impermanent, their mind naturally slopes, and inclines to seclusion.
It becomes the path of least resistance. They've eliminated the defiling influences of greed, hate, and delusion, not through sheer moral force, but through penetrating insight into the nature of reality. The system becomes self-sustaining.
And so we move past feeling, even supreme bliss, to the final state, nibbana, or extinguishment. If this state is beyond feeling and beyond experience, how on earth did the text describe ultimate freedom?
It is defined almost entirely by absence. It's not an eternal heaven or an everlasting state of conscious bliss. It is the total cessation of the causal chain of suffering.
It's described
As the stillness of all activities, the letting go of all attachments, the ending of craving, fading away, cessation, extinguishment.
that sounds like giving up everything, even the sublime joy that was achieved through all that intense spiritual practice.
It is the cessation of the need for experience altogether, the craving that leads to future lives, which is all mixed up with relishing and greed for experience, both external and internal, is totally gone.
You're giving up the entire framework of identity that necessitates rebirth and suffering.
The mind is quenched, like a fire that has simply run out of fuel. The psychological engine of clinging has just stopped.
This is such a powerful, comprehensive model. It addresses your original query by saying, yes, sustained attention on breathing absolutely gives rise to profound internal pleasure. And these ancient texts map out the exact progression.
They do.
But the ultimate insight is that this pleasure is merely a highly advanced tool, a tool for learning the final necessary lesson, non-clinging.
The spiritual bliss is the proof that freedom from the external world is possible. The wisdom is the realization that freedom from the internal world of experience is also required for unshakable peace.
So we've completed a deep dive into an ancient psychology that really functions as a highly precise self-engineering manual. We traced the path from the simple act of sitting in seclusion, establishing mindfulness of breathing,
All the way through the systematic stilling of physical processes, which leads directly to the powerful generation of the jhanas.
the jhanas, that rapture, the piti, and the bliss, the sukha, that can drench the body. They are the predictable, self-generated reward states. They provide a visceral, definitive yes to your question. Does sustained attention create internal pleasure?
A pleasure so profound it completely eclipses the sensual world.
But the architecture of liberation demands more. It recognizes the great paradox. Even that sublime spiritual rapture is a conditioned experience. It's impermanent. And if the practitioner succumbs to relishing that bliss,
That mental bringing.
they remain bound by craving. They've just traded one prison for a slightly prettier, more comfortable one.
The wisdom tradition insists that the internal pleasure is merely momentum. It's the rocket fuel. It's the first taste of a reality independent of externals, and it's strong enough to motivate the practitioner to pursue the final, non-experiential freedom.
Which is the cognitive realization of impermanence that allows the total cessation of clinging to all the aggregates.
The ultimate goal is not better feeling, but the absolute cessation of the need for any feeling whatsoever.
This is the radical insight at the heart of it all. You use the internal bliss to defeat the external world, and then you use the insight gained in the stillness of that bliss to defeat the internal world of feeling itself.
It's a complete path.
Which leaves us with the final, provocative thought that these foundational texts present for you to mull over. If true, unshakable freedom lies beyond even the most sublime, self-generated internal rapture, that bliss of the third jhana, does this mean that the search for any conditioned internal pleasure, even the spiritual kind that arises from meditation, must eventually be seen as just another temporary condition to be let go of?
If we grasp the bliss, do we remain bound? The ancient psychologists suggest the answer is absolutely yes. True liberation is not finding the best thing to hold on to.
But recognizing the nature of all things and letting go of the necessity of holding on to anything at all.
That's the freedom.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the ancient psychology of internal pleasure and the surprising road to liberation. We'll see you next time.